The air in Texas hit Ilara like a warm, dusty blanket. It was nothing like the freezing, shell-shattered landscape she had left behind. She stood with a line of other prisoners, all boys, most younger than her 17 years, blinking against the harsh American sun. They had been shipped from Europe to Camp Eagle Creek, a sprawling complex of tents and barbed wire in the middle of nowhere. Ilara Brandt didn't look like the other prisoners. She was taller, with broad, squared-off shoulders and a severe, tired set to her jaw. When she was captured, she'd been fighting alongside grown men, having been pushed from auxiliary anti-aircraft duty right into the front lines. The uniform she still wore, threadbare and patched, looked too big on the boys around her, but on Ilara it looked like a second skin. She was one of the few girls forced into combat roles late in the war. The Americans, especially the guards, didn't know how to categorize her. They saw a German soldier, and a defiant one at that, a massive man in a crisp uniform. Sergeant Major Frank McKinley stood waiting. He had a face carved out of granite, and his eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the line of defeated youth. When his gaze landed on Ilara, it paused. "Well, look here, boys," McKinley's voice boomed, thick with contempt. "Looks like they scraped the bottom of the barrel for this lot. We even got one of their little Fräuleins." The younger guards snickered, but McKinley didn't smile. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps toward Ilara. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked, his voice low and challenging. "Brandt." "Ilara," she answered, her voice surprisingly steady, though hoarse from the journey. She didn't flinch or drop her gaze. "Brandt," he repeated, savoring the word like something foul. 17 years old, I hear. You look like you think you're still in charge, Brandt. You think you're tough? You think you're a hero for fighting a lost war with toys?" Ilara kept silent. She knew better than to argue. Argument was weakness. "The war's over, Brandt. You're not a soldier. You're a mouth to feed and a liability. And out here, we don't salute children." The injustice of his words burned in her chest, but she had learned years ago to keep the fire banked. She wasn't fighting for some lost cause. She had been fighting to survive and to protect the others. Behind her, a skinny, pale boy named Dieter, no older than 13, stumbled. He hadn't eaten properly in weeks, and the Texas heat was overwhelming. Ilara, without taking her eyes off the sergeant major, subtly shifted her weight, allowing Dieter to lean against her back, keeping him upright and out of sight of the guards. This was her mission now. Keep Dieter safe. McKinley noticed the slight movement. "Stand up straight, all of you! You think I don't see that? You think you can slouch your way through an American camp?" Ilara took the full force of his glare, willing him to focus on her and leave Dieter alone. She swallowed hard and forced herself to stare straight ahead at the barbed wire fence. She was insulted, mocked, and clearly underestimated. But the fire inside her, the core of her strength, was untouched. As the column was marched toward the crude barracks, a young corporal named Ben Hayes, who had watched the whole exchange from the sidelines, felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. He wasn't sure what he hated more, the arrogance he saw in the German prisoners or the unnecessary cruelty of his superior, Sergeant Major McKinley. He saw the girl, Ilara, not flinch, and he wondered what kind of war could carve such defiance into a child's face. Life in Camp Eagle Creek settled into a monotonous routine of work details. The U.S. government, rather than keeping thousands of prisoners idle, utilized them for local labor, construction, harvesting crops, and clearing land. It was grueling, back-breaking work under the relentless sun, but for Ilara it was a distraction. Physical exhaustion was preferable to the exhaustion of fear. McKinley, true to his word, made her life difficult. He assigned her to the heaviest tasks, hauling sacks of concrete, splitting thick logs, and digging irrigation ditches that seemed to run halfway across the county. He watched, waiting for her to break, to cry, or to complain. "Let's see that famous German grit now, Brandt," he'd bark, leaning against a truck, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you can fight a war, you can certainly dig a hole." Ilara never responded. She simply worked. She worked with an almost terrifying efficiency, her focus absolute. She learned that if she finished her own tasks quickly, she could subtly shift to help Dieter, who was struggling badly. The boy had a hacking cough and was wasting away. The other German prisoners, the older ones, resented Alara. They saw her as too headstrong, too visible, and too much of a risk. They muttered that her defiance would only bring down the wrath of the guards on everyone. But the younger boys, the frightened ones like Dieter, clung to her stoic presence. She was their older sister, their quiet protector. It was during one such work detail, hauling fence posts, that Alara encountered her first ally. Dr. Eleanor Vance, an older woman from Washington who had volunteered as a cultural liaison and camp educator, drove out in a worn-out sedan to inspect the work site. Dr. Vance was a historian, not a soldier, and she looked at the young Germans not as enemies, but as historical footnotes, victims of a collapsing regime. She watched Alara working, her dark braid plastered to her neck with sweat, her brow furrowed in concentration. The girl was hauling 2 posts when the older men were struggling with one. Dr. Vance approached McKinley, holding a clipboard. "Sergeant Major, that young woman Brandt. She seems to be outperforming your men," McKinley scoffed. "She's a fanatic, Doctor. High energy. They're all brainwashed. Best not to encourage them. She'll collapse soon enough." "She's 17, Dr. Vance countered gently. "Her official intake records say 17. She's working like a fully grown laborer." That evening, back in the overcrowded barracks, Dieter was shivering, unable to eat his watery stew. Alara, unnoticed in the dim light, slid her own bowl, half full, across the rough floor to him. "You must eat, Dieter. You need the strength," she whispered in German. "But you worked all day, Lara," he murmured, his eyes full of fear and gratitude. "I am strong. I ate enough for 2, remember? I need to stay strong to watch your back," she lied easily. "You eat now. No talk." Ilara's sacrifice was small, a half bowl of soup, but it was a deliberate act of love and protection in a place defined by hate and suspicion. She might have looked like a hardened soldier, but beneath the rough exterior, the emotional core of a brave, self-sacrificing teenager was desperately trying to keep another heart beating. The breaking point came during a routine inventory of tools at the construction site. A heavy sledgehammer was reported missing. McKinley immediately went on high alert. "Sabotage was a serious offense, punishable by severe consequences. Who was near the storage shed last, Brandt?" McKinley barked, standing in the center of the camp courtyard, the tool handlers lined up before him. "I was securing the lock, Sergeant Major," Alara said honestly. "The tools were accounted for when I left." "Liar!" he snapped. "A soldier of the Wehrmacht always lies. You are the one with the defiant look. You are the one who hates us the most." The hammer was found moments later, carefully concealed under Ilara's own bunk. It was a perfect malicious setup. An older German POW named Klaus, who had openly criticized Ilara's leadership and resented her influence over the younger boys, had planted it, hoping to eliminate her presence. McKinley didn't need proof. He had his prejudice. "That's it, Brandt. Solitary. Hard labor for a week. We'll see how brave you look when you're staring at 4 walls." Dr. Vance, who had arrived for her evening class with the prisoners, protested vehemently. "Sergeant Major, this is ridiculous. She's a child, and she's the most dedicated worker you have. This smells like a setup." "This is a military matter, Doctor," McKinley said, cutting her off, his voice ice. "You teach history. I enforce the rules. Take her away, Corporal." Ilara was dragged to a small, unventilated hut at the edge of the camp. She felt the injustice like a physical blow, not for the punishment, but for the loss of her ability to watch over Dieter. Now, he was alone. Inside the solitary confinement, the heat was suffocating. Ilara sat on the dirt floor, her mind spinning not with hatred, but with a deep, quiet sadness for the lost years. To steady herself, she used a charred piece of wood to scratch out lines on the wooden wall, not words, but small, crude drawings of the few good memories she had. A sunny day, a piece of chocolate, her grandmother's garden. Outside, the young guard, Corporal Ben Hayes, stood watch. He felt sick. He had seen Klaus, the older prisoner, lingering by Ilara's bunk minutes before the discovery. Ben hadn't said anything. He couldn't testify against a superior, especially not McKinley, but he knew she was innocent. Later that night, During the darkest hour of his shift, Ben crept to the hut. He couldn't open the door, but he knew where a loose floorboard lay. He lifted the edge just enough to slide something small through the gap. He pushed in a tiny folded piece of paper and a slightly melted chocolate bar. On the paper, in shaky handwriting, was one single simple word: sorry. Ilara heard the faint scrape of the floorboard. She found the chocolate, a luxury she hadn't tasted in years, and the note. It was the first act of unexpected kindness she had received since the war began. It was a secret language of compassion. This small, risky gesture from the young American Guard was the first true seed of safety and connection in the hostile camp. It was a simple, emotional beat of shared humanity, a silent promise that someone saw her. Dr. Vance was furious. Ilara's unjust punishment fueled her determination. She used her administrative authority, digging into records and interviewing prisoners away from the Guard's scrutiny. She found witnesses who reluctantly confirmed that Klaus had been harassing Ilara and was seen lurking near the tool shed. More importantly, she found a small, significant detail. The sledgehammer found under Ilara's bunk had a unique, distinct chip mark on the handle. When Dr. Vance checked the sign-out log, she saw that Klaus had signed the hammer out the previous day, reporting it broken, then signed it back in without a notation of repair, then signed it out again just before the theft. The evidence, though circumstantial, was enough to expose the frame. McKinley was forced to release Ilara. His face was a thundercloud. He didn't apologize. He just ordered her back to duty. "Get back to work, Brandt. And stay out of trouble," he growled. The forced act of justice, however, chipped away at his authority and his certainty. Ilara's release was a victory, but the true change was in the silent communication that followed. Corporal Ben Hayes, knowing he risked a court-martial, found moments during the work details to exchange glances with Ilara. He learned her signals. A hand clench meant Dieter is coughing. A slight nod meant I understand. The word sorry had become their invisible bridge. One day, while working near the supply depot, Ilara overheard a muffled, tearful conversation between two older, local farmhands delivering supplies. They were talking about Sergeant Major McKinley. "Did you hear? It's been a year this week since Billy was killed in the Hurtgen Forest," one man said sadly. "Frank McKinley hasn't been right since," the other man sighed. The boy was only 17. Just a kid. Frank told me he volunteered right out of high school. "That German flak got him," Ilara froze. 17! McKinley's son was the same age as her, and he was killed by the very forces she had reluctantly served. She suddenly understood the cold fury in McKinley's eyes. It wasn't just general wartime hatred. It was personal, searing grief masked as discipline. Every time he looked at Ilara, he wasn't seeing a defiant German soldier. He was seeing the face of his son's young enemy, a mirror to the lost potential of his own child. This discovery didn't excuse McKinley's cruelty, but it gave Ilara a critical understanding. His hatred was a shared burden of loss. The war had not just taken life. It had taken the fathers and sons of America and the childhoods of Germany. The vast gulf between them suddenly felt smaller, bridged by the common tragedy of 17-year-old lives destroyed by war. This realization was a quiet, powerful emotional beat, the beginning of a path toward true redemption, not just for herself, but for the twisted relationship with her captor. The quiet monotony of Camp Eagle Creek was shattered one late autumn night by a ferocious storm. The creek that gave the camp its name swelled into a raging torrent, rapidly flooding the lower perimeter and threatening the makeshift infirmary, where the most vulnerable, including Dieter, were housed. Panic erupted. Guards shouted contradictory orders. The German prisoners, conditioned by years of fear and discipline, mostly froze. It was Ilara who acted. The years of harsh military training, the very thing McKinley despised, suddenly became their salvation. She took charge instantly, her voice cutting through the chaos, steady and clear in German. "Old men to the fences! Younger men to the infirmary! Dieter, stay close!" she commanded. She directed the younger, faster boys to quickly move the beds and supplies out of the infirmary hut and up the nearest slope. She worked shoulder to shoulder with them, lifting heavy mattresses and securing canvas covers against the driving rain. Her actions were purely tactical, efficient, and selfless. McKinley, scrambling to organize the American Guards, saw the impossible happening. The defiant girl he had mocked and punished was organizing the camp faster and more effectively than his own NCOs. When one of the infirmary tents nearly collapsed, threatening to crush 3 injured men, Elara sprinted through the rushing water, grabbed the main support pole, and held the weight of the tent until 2 guards could secure new ropes. "Brandt, get out of there!" McKinley yelled, his fear for her safety overriding his hatred. She ignored him, her feet rooted in the muddy earth, her face streaming with rain and sweat. She held the pole until the danger passed, her knuckles white, her body shaking from the strain. In the midst of the chaos, a momentary escape presented itself. The floodwaters had washed out a large section of the perimeter fence, and several older, desperate prisoners saw their chance. They motioned for Elara to join them. Freedom was literally a few steps away. Elara looked at the hole in the fence, then at the frantic guards, and then at the small group of boys she had managed to gather safely on the high ground, including a very weak, trembling Dieter. She looked back at the fence and shook her head. The choice was clear. She chose responsibility over freedom. She turned her back on the escape route, picked up a shovel, and started throwing mud and debris into the breach, signaling to McKinley's men where the fence was broken. It was a defining sacrifice. McKinley stared. He saw not a defeated prisoner, but a leader, a brave soul who had just saved American supplies and possibly American lives, all while sacrificing her own chance at freedom. The hatred in his heart finally cracked. In the early morning light, after the storm subsided, Corporal Ben Hayes found Dieter shivering badly, his cough worsening, still huddled against Elara. Ben looked at the girl, exhausted, mud-caked but victorious, and at the sergeant major, who was watching from a distance, silent and defeated. Risking everything, Ben snuck a small field medical kit to Elara, along with a note telling her exactly how to mix a medicine for Dieter's cough. He was committed now. He found safety in his conscience and love in the form of quiet rebellion for her sake. Weeks passed. The camp slowly returned to normal, but the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. McKinley no longer targeted Elara. In fact, he addressed her with a grudging, distant respect, assigning her light duties in the camp kitchen, a position that allowed her to access better food for Dieter, who was slowly recovering. The war was declared officially over, and the time for repatriation, sending the German prisoners home, arrived. The camp buzzed with excitement and apprehension. Elara, though she had no family or home to return to, felt a strange sense of finality. She had survived. She had protected Dieter. That was her justice. On the day of departure, all the German prisoners were lined up to board the transport trucks that would take them to the repatriation trains. As Elara stood in the line, McKinley approached her, not with contempt, but with something she hadn't expected: solemnity. He was holding a small, official-looking envelope. "Brandt," he said, his voice flat but steady, "I have something for you." He cleared his throat, unable to look her in the eye. "For your actions during the flood, you saved the lives of several men, American personnel, and significant property. The command has been notified." He pushed the envelope into her hand. "It's an official commendation for valor, something to prove you didn't just fight for the wrong side, but that you fought for life." He finally met her gaze. "My son," he said, the words strained and quiet, "was 17. He died believing he was fighting people like you. I see now. He was fighting for people like you, for children caught in the middle." It wasn't an apology, but it was the profound respect earned that she had worked for all along. McKinley had finally redeemed his own grief. Elara nodded once, unable to speak, clutching the envelope. She was turning to step onto the truck when a voice called out, sharp and authoritative. "Brandt! Stop! You are not cleared for repatriation." The twist. It was Dr. Vance rushing toward her, followed closely by Corporal Ben Hayes looking nervous but determined. "Elara Brandt," Dr. Vance announced, breathless, holding up a stack of official papers. Based on the investigative reports, your documented age, and the illegal nature of your conscription into combat units, you are no longer classified as a prisoner of war." She gestured to the papers. "Ben and I worked with the Department of State. We found a precedent. You are being granted humanitarian asylum in the United States effective immediately. You are not a returning soldier. You are a refugee, a victim of war, and an official resident." Elara stared, the words barely registering. Asylum, safety, not as a soldier, but as a person. "The rules are clear," Dr. Vance smiled warmly. "As a refugee, you cannot leave the country, and you are free to stay with an approved sponsor." Elara looked past Dr. Vance. Standing just outside the camp gate, waiting patiently by the sedan, was Dieter, pale but smiling, waving furiously. Dr. Vance had already arranged for his temporary foster care with a local family who owned the farm where Elara had worked. She had saved him, and now he was safe. Elara turned back to the gate, her heart pounding not with the fear of battle, but with the hope of a future. As she walked toward the open gate for the very first time, Corporal Ben Hayes stepped forward. He reached out and gently took her hand, the same hand that had gripped the post during the storm, the same hand that had received his secret chocolate. "I found a job at the local university," he said, his eyes shining. "I'll be starting school next week. We can work together, Elara. Build something new." Elara squeezed his hand, a genuine, strong smile finally breaking through the granite of her face. She stepped across the threshold, past the wire, past the years of war, and into the sun-drenched freedom of a country she had expected to contain her, but which had instead given her safety and a chance at love. The child soldier had found her unexpected home,